webinars. We had good attendance this morning. We're delighted for that, and we appreciate you coming along this afternoon as well. I would sort of sit back and relax because we will record this, and after the webinar, we send it out to anyone who's, let's say, registered. I'll talk pretty fast. There are more people sort of drop in as we go along. But let me just say, this is the Food Sense webinar. A little introduction from myself. My name is Martin Peacock. I've got a couple of colleagues with me this afternoon, Solron, that you'll see quite a bit of, and also Niti, who's the product manager for the Food Sense product. So I'll go forward a little bit and just say, look, everyone who actually gets hold of a Food Sense, you go through a similar kind of demo that we're going through today, except it's much more sort of personal and let's say live in terms of you're in the room with us asking questions. When I say in the room, in the virtual room, but we definitely do online training with everyone who's a Food Sense user. And we're particularly then interested in kind of finding out something very specific about your samples, because samples are different. You know, some people are doing whole powders. Some people are doing actual chilies themselves. Some people are doing salsas. People are doing, I want to say oleum, which is this kind of distilled oil that's super rich in capsaicin. So we come across all sorts of sample types. And so when people actually kind of essentially on board and become a real client, you get personal online training. But also we then back up the online training with a weekly Q&A session, questions and answers. Now, these question answers, you would ask us a question, let's say during the week, because you had some data, and your questions are really going to kind of come around from what dilution do I need to use? Is my repeatability correct? They're fairly, the questions are always the same, and we always have nice ways of answering them. But that said, we do a weekly webinar. So if you have a question during the week, we'll answer it in a sort of an anonymized manner in that week as well. Going just to say as well that if you've got colleagues that are sort of super interested in any of this, we will do this webinar again in September. So first of all, actually, I should say that the Q&As are all set up for September, so we will have one every week in September. But we also have a live streaming demo webinar also set up in September. We don't want to be too much and speak about ourselves, but you know, just to kind of give you a sense of who we are. This is EP. We were launched in 2014. We're ISO 13485, so we follow a quality system. Our quality system is quite strict because what we generally do is develop and manufacture electrochemical biosensors for medical diagnostics. They call it IVD, in vitro diagnostics. When you look at an IVD, you'll find that it shares a lot of things with Food Sense. So what we're doing at ZP is translating technology that's traditionally used for measuring like glucose in the blood for a diabetic and translating it into food quality. We have a number of facilities around the world, primarily in Norway and the UK. This is the team. The team's essentially from everywhere. I think there's 23 languages spoken in the company, which is a sort of sign of the diversity in the company. And we have really state-of-the-art facilities. You know, these are not your kind of academic laboratories. You know, these are what they call class 7 clean rooms and even class 5 clean rooms. So they're extremely clean, and almost the particulate count is less than what you'd actually find in probably food production. They're also sterile as well, or I should say aseptic, because we actually manufacture technologies that get implanted into people. Anyway, we do have a number of facilities, primarily in the Norway and in the UK. Today, we're actually going to talk about Food Sense. We're going to do a couple of demos actually on chili. If you ever have any problems with the technology, this is Richard Compton, and this is the guy to complain to. But no, Richard is a professor at the University of Oxford, and we've got some of his graduates actually in the company. We've had a long relationship with Oxford. Richard was the first one to kind of come up with this idea of using what's called electrochemical analysis to measure the capsaicin in products. So this is what we will do today. Now, when Solron's doing her demo, Solron will repeat this at the time and say, there's a progress bar on the app. You will see this kind of circle, and it will go It'll take about a minute to go round, and it's literally doing this. What it's doing is it's recording what we call a voltammogram, but this is really a kind of a signal for capsaicin. Capsaicin has a very distinct signal. As we do the, I won't call it experiment, but maybe call it analysis, we get these peaks and troughs, and they're not random. This tells us, first of all, that it is capsaicin, and there's a sort of very distinct one that appears now. So we got a series of things that should happen, and is those things happening to say, yeah, that's capsaicin. And then Solron will sort of say to you, and it's the peak height and the area under the curve tells us how much material is actually in the sample. So we're both identifying that it's capsaicin, and then we are quantifying that it's capsaicin, because these voltammograms are indicative of A, capsaicin's there, and B, how much capsaicin is actually in the sample. Now, measuring the hotness of chilies, this is the slide I've used in the past, but I'll just sort of bring it back up for completion. You can do HPLC testing. I don't know if most people are doing some sort of HPLC testing. It's fairly limited because actually it's quite expensive to do. And the expense actually comes from the HPLC test itself is about 20 minutes, but the sample preparation is very manual, uses organic solvent, and I think it's used, I want to say distillation, but you're at least boiling, or you're distilling the chili sample with ethanol to try and extract the capsaicin. It's quite a laborious procedure, and that's why I think the testing itself is quite expensive. The fact is, what we don't see when we get the HPLC result is how much effort and how much manual effort has gone into the sample preparation. So that's a big source of error that people don't realize. They get this, and I'll discuss certificate of analysis in a moment. But when you look at a certificate of analysis, it should have an error on it, but they never report the error. So people do take those results as being absolutely accurate, but they're not absolutely accurate. You can do a Wilbur-Scoville organoleptic test where you get a group of colleagues and you get them to test and score. Nobody does it, it's too expensive. Most people are releasing either it's an incoming test or an outgoing test, but they're generally using a quality manager to kind of, I say guessing here, I suspect it's people are testing and trying to use an opinion as to whether the product is in spec or out of spec. And then you've got food sense. Now, realistically, if you're tasting something, it's really subjective. Literally, the word subjective has that word subject in it, and it's sort of subject dependent. Whether Solron tests something or I test something, our perception of hotness is very different. There's actually videos about that. And then there's objective testing, which is what we're doing. We're essentially doing analytical chemistry. We are looking at that molecule, identifying it, and quantifying it, and that's objective. You can still have people who kind of, you make the same product, it's 15,000 Scoville heat units, and some people report it's mild and some people report it's hot. There's nothing you can do about it. That's just, human nature. But food sense is an objective test as opposed to a subjective test. I did say earlier on that ZP, we're ISO 13485, so we've got a pretty strict quality system, and that's because we make products that actually, I don't want to say life and death decisions are made upon them, but that would be the case. We did get involved with SARS-CoV-2. That was pretty life and death. So most of the time we're actually doing this really hard problem. So it's quite nice to work in food quality. I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's essentially easier than some of the other things that we have to do. So when you look at the food sense, yes, it actually looks like a glucose meter. For example, there's a meter, there's a sensor, and there's a little bit more updated than a typical sort of glucose strip test for diabetics. We've got an app involved as well. And the reason that apps are not so used with these glucose strips is just because glucose strips are actually quite old. Whereas, if you were doing a modern product today, you probably would involve an app. I have made a little point about HPLC not being as great as people expect or believe, but we do actually have an HPLC at ZP. We have a waters instrument. I was going to say Agilent and Waters are the kind of, and PerkinElmer do quite a nice HPLC as well, actually. But Waters are one of the leading providers and manufacturers of HPLC. We have one of those. And we also have our electrochemical method. So what we did before we sort of launched to the world we did actually validate that. I can see here that we're using the AOAC method to both test products by HPLC and by electrochemistry and make sure that we correlate it. And so a correlation of R squared equals 1 is like a perfect correlation. We got an R squared equals 0.98 if I round up, which is, you know, considering you can't have having 1 is very suspicious. Let's put it that way. But we've also had independent validation as well. So this is Charlie Rower at the University of Minnesota. Obviously, so I want to say sort of north middle of the USA. And Charlie, I wasn't aware of this, but he bought one of these FoodSense products. He tested it on chili, so he was trying to help growers locally kind of quantify the hotness of their product. And I think he actually gave us quite a glowing response on this, or glowing report, because he did send the same samples out by HPLC, but he recognized that, you know, by sending the samples out by HPLC, he sent the samples out. It took a while for the samples to come back. He could only afford to do one test. So he had both a cost and a delay in knowing the results. Whereas actually, I think you really appreciate the FoodSense, because you'll see it today with Solron that, you know, you can, in fact, at the end of this webinar will go on for 30 minutes. You'll hear me talking for a big chunk of it, but you'll also see us do 2 tests, all in within 30 minutes. And, you know, typically a test would actually only take 4 minutes, you know, but it's not the test itself. It's all the talking and putting the sensor in there and pipetting on and preparing the sample. It's pretty quick. Charlie liked the speed anyway, and he also liked the low cost of test. And it was a lot less than the $100 you would otherwise have to pay on HPLC. But that's independent of us. You can find it on our website, foodsensetechnology.com, post HPLC determination of capsaicin and FoodSense. If you kind of put these terms into Google, hopefully then you'll find the page anyway. Just to say on HPLC, this is it's more than a thought experiment. We do have clients who have done this kind of testing, and we know it ourselves, that if you take a known sample and send it to a test lab, you will get a certificate of analysis. Great. If you take the same sample and send it to a different test lab, you'll get a certificate of analysis. Great. If you take the same sample, send it to a third test lab, you'll get a certificate of analysis. But I think you'll already know that actually you'll get 3 different results. So it's just to say, because one of the things we get a lot of is, this is my certificate of analysis. I expect you to reach this number, but that number is not cast in stone or set in stone. It depends. You send the same sample to different labs, you'll get 3 different results. So you describe that as none of them are, well, between the 3 labs, they're not precise. And you could argue that none of them are actually accurate. There's an error associated with it. So just be a little bit careful on those certificates of analysis. It's an expensive experiment to do, because if you didn't even cost your time into this, you know, it could easily cost you $100 per test. So it's a sort of a minimum of $300 to do that experiment. But if you did it, you would actually find that different labs, it's statistically impossible for them to give you the absolute same number back. There's too much error in the measurement. There's also another test that we have done where we send the same sample to the same lab and we get a certificate of analysis. We rename the sample, but we send it a following month to the same lab and get another certificate, and the same sample to the same lab, but we rename it every time so that the lab doesn't appreciate that we're essentially sending the same sample. You'll get the same result, though. When I say the same result, you'll get the same phenomena, that each result will be different. So people, in some worlds, you know, people call it kind of the golden standard. The AOAC method is not the golden standard. You will find variability within labs and between labs. Now, solubility of capsaicin, this is one of the big questions that kind of comes up. Why do we suggest different volumes of buffer depending on what we think the hotness of the sample is? So today, Solron will do Tabasco sauce. We only do Tabasco because it kind of represents a mild chili sauce, and you'll see Solron do like a 1 in 10 dilution. Later on, I don't know if she'll use pure naga, a whole chili, or a chili powder, but there she'll be doing a 1 in 100 dilution. Why is this? Okay, and the answer is this. First of all, we want this product to be sort of easy to use and non-toxic. So non-toxic means that we're not using organic solvents in the buffer. Organic solvents would be useful because actually they help to dissolve capsaicin. But once you start bringing organic solvents into the laboratory, into a food facility, it's a different type of product. You know, you've got to be careful about those organic solvents getting into the food materials. You've got to be careful of the staff, etc. So we have made a non-toxic solution. But I'm going to get back to the point why we do different dilutions. So it comes down to this. Capsaicin is what we call an organic molecule. It doesn't matter. It's got a benzene ring in it, and it's what we describe as aromatic. But it's very organic. It's got a lot of carbon atoms and a lot of hydrogen atoms, and it likes to dissolve in organic solvents. So the reason that you can get a very hot, I'm thinking like Da Bomb or something like that, which is a sort of very hot sauce, is because there's oils and fats in there, and it's those oils or fats that solubilize the capsaicin and allow you to solubilize it, dissolve it. So capsaicin does not want to dissolve in water solutions, i.e. our buffer. And then in order to overcome that, if it's mild, so mild, you know, let's say 5,000 Scoville heat units, we'll tell you to do a 1 in 10 dilution. So what that means is you'll take a sample of the product and add 10 times the volume of the buffer. That's because then we know that we got enough buffer to dissolve and extract out the capsaicin. If we think it's hotter, something like 50,000 Scoville heat units, we'll ask you to do a 1 in 100 dilution. Now we refine this when you become a real user. Let's say we'll actually get online with you and have a meeting with you just to have a look at your results and kind of do any tweaking on this. But the reason the volume of buffer changes is because capsaicin is not very soluble. And if something's not very soluble and you want to extract it all or dilute it or dissolve it all, when it's not very soluble, you have to increase the amount of buffer in order to solubilize that capsaicin. And that's why we do that. Now, just a slight update. Now, today we're going to demonstrate chili, but it's probably worth saying that we also can do ginger. And though we haven't launched it, we're also very interested in pepper as well. There's a molecule called piperin in there. We have done some internal testing in the past on measuring piperin, but I'm sort of tangenting. I'm going off on a tangent slightly. Let me bring it back and say, today we won't be testing on ginger. I can see in this video, Solrun is testing on a ginger shot. We are going to be testing on chili. But if you're ever interested in ginger, you can essentially Google probably ginger sensor, Zimmer Peacock, and you will find essentially those videos. But let me stay a little bit more focused. I did say that we do a demo every month. So if there's colleagues who you want to basically see this live demo and kind of sort of meet the team in this kind of online way, there's something on the 26th of September. There's a free demo there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to turn off my screen and I'm going to let Solrun very quickly introduce herself and go forward with it. Hi, Solrun.
All right, so yeah, my name is Solrun and I'm a scientist here at Zimmer Peacock, and I will run a quick demonstration for you, testing some chilies using the food sense box. I'll just show you a close-up of the food sense box, so see fairly small, and then we'll use an app on our phone. So the first step is to prepare the sample. So as Martin said, we will test the Tabasco sauce. And in order for me to just pipette it really easily into the vial, I will just pour some in a petri dish or a weighing chip, just so that it's easy to pipette it. So here I have an empty vial and I have the chili pop buffer. The chili pop buffer is an electrolyte, and it gives us the desired environment for our sample. So as Martin said, we will do a 1 to 10 mixture ratio with the Tabasco, since it's not that spicy. So I will add 1 milliliter of the buffer into the vial like that. And then I will add 100 microliter of the Tabasco sauce. Just need to adjust the pipettes. 100 microliter, like that. And then I will pipette from the Tabasco sauce. And I will show you the close-up. Okay, so here is the vial with the buffer, and I will add the Tabasco sauce like that. Okay, and as you probably can notice, the Tabasco is now gathering in the bottom of the vial. So what I will do is I will use a vortex just to help me mix it real quick, just so that I will have a homogeneous solution. So the sample preparation is a very crucial step when you want to measure the spiciness. So you want to make sure that all the capsaicin has been extracted from the sample into the buffer and all of your solution. And Tabasco is a fairly homogeneous solution, and it doesn't have that many chunks and bits, so we don't really need to mix it for that long. So this is what it looks like after you mix it. You can still see some chunks and bits in there, but that's okay, because the capsaicin will extract into the buffer. So the next step for us to do now is to insert a sensor into the food sense box. And I will show that in a close-up like this. So here's the opening, and then I will push it in. And you might have noticed that I'm making sure not to touch the electrodes of the sensor. So this area right here. So I'm touching it either on the sides or on the contact pads. And then I will just tilt the screen so that we can see it up close like that. And now what I will do is I will pipette 50 microliters onto the sensor. But first, let me show you what the app looks like. So this is the FoodSense app, where you will type in the mixture ratio that you're working with, and right now it's 1 to 10. And whenever I'm ready, I will hit the measure button, and the analysis will start. So what I will do now is I will pipette 50 microliters onto the sensor to cover all the electrodes. With that, and I will pipette it. Okay, and then I will click measure. So now it starts running. In the meantime, I will show you the close up. I will lift up the sensor for the next measurement so that you can see the bubble. But this is what it looks like, and then we have the measurement running. So as Martin was telling you, that I will tell you what it's doing right now, and it's going through that cyclical sonogram, and it's looking through the peaks and relating those peak heights in the area below the curves to the amount of capsaicin it can find in the sample. And so it's a fairly quick measurement, a little bit less than a minute. So now it's wrapping up, and it comes off as 2,500 scald heat units, which is in that range that we would expect for Tabasco. And so we will click on the new measurements and start preparing the next sample. So for this one, we're gonna prepare a sample of 1 to 100 because we are working on a spicier sample this time. And these sensors are also a one-time use sensor. Because the capsaicin does very much like the surface of the electrodes. So if you would retest it now, it would give you higher scald heat unit counts. So that's why we dispose of the sensors every time we use it. Okay, so I will insert a new sensor into the FoodSense box, and then I will start preparing the next sample. And today I was thinking that we could try to test a powder. So this is a powder that I expect to be more spicy than Tabasco, but of unknown scope heat unit counts. So I have cheated, so I've already prepared a vial containing 0.1 gram of the powder so that I didn't have to weigh that out in this webinar. And I have 0.1 gram, and I will then add 10 milliliters of the buffer. So I will show you a close up again. So here's the powder on the bottom, and then I will add 10 milliliters like that. All right, and then I'll add it into the vial. This. Right. And tighten the lid. Okay, so right now you can see that the powder is accumulating at the bottom. Again, I will use the vortex to mix it. So now that we're working with something that is less homogeneous than the Tabasco sauce, I would ideally spend more time on the extraction. And by spending more time, I will allow for it to mix longer using the vortex, and even let it rest on the table for let's say an hour. So all the capsaicin in the powder is being extracted into the solution, but as Martin was saying, the solubility of capsaicin is not that high. That's why we need to add a lot of buffer as well, and why we also need to give it some time to actually mix real well. So okay, so I will show you what it looks like now, and you can see that it's still like the powder is still falling to the bottom, which is okay. We will just pipette from the solution, and the capsaicin is in the solution and will give us the results for the sample itself. But as I said, for a powder, I would ideally let it just rest on the table or on the bench top for let's say an hour or two, depending on the grains, and then I will mix it again before I pipette it onto the sensor. So again, I will pipette 50 microliters, which is a sufficient volume for covering the electrodes. And then I will also show you. So 50 microliters. 50 microliters, and as you can see, it's too dark, but yeah, I go like into the solution, and I will pipette onto the sensor like that, and then I will be very careful lifting up the device so that you can see how the bubble is covering the electrodes and staying in place. Okay, so I'll put it back down, and then I will click, then I'll change the mixture ratio to 1:100, and I will click measure. Yeah, so this was a powder, and sometimes we work with even more chunky sauces than Tabasco, or yeah, or more grainy chili powders, and then we would optimize the extraction by letting it rest or mixing for a longer period of time. And if I would be working with chilies themselves, I would try to mince them up to reduce the extraction time really. And now it's coming to an end. And it finds the SCOTE heat unit count to be 52,000. So quite a lot more spicy than the Tabasco, which was only 2,500. So it shows a wide range for both pungency, but also the variety of samples that you can test.
All right, perfect. Well, to be fair to you, I don't know. I said the Tabasco was like 5,000, but to be honest with you, I mean, we often get it at like 2.5 to 5,000 because depending on the batch of Tabasco, I think when they ship it, they say it's sort of 2.5 to 5,000. So we always get it because why? Because the system is actually accurate. And I suspect that Tabasco has some quite good quality control at their end as well. You know, they're a substantial company. I'm laughing to myself because I said that powder would be 50,000 and, you know, you got 52,000. So that's something like a 4% that's difference between the prediction and what you actually measured. All right, well, I appreciate that. I just want to say to our guests today, I don't think we have your email, but don't worry about it. We are going to send out, if you're registered, we will be sending a copy of this live streaming webinar and demo to everyone. So if you've got colleagues, then they will get it, so you can get it from them. If you've got any questions as well, you may have been correspondence with Niti, who's online with us, so hopefully that's one way of contacting us. Otherwise, you can also find us at, it's a bit of a mouthful, foodsensetechnology.com/contact us. You'll find us pretty responsive. But I want to say a special thanks to Niti for organizing today. I especially want to say thank you to Solrun for, you know, it's not easy doing live demos in front of people, so appreciate that, Solrun. And I also appreciate that it's quite late where you are as well, so thanks for staying late this evening. So if you've got any questions, reach out to us. We will be doing this on the 26th of September again, but we say thank you and have a good day or a good afternoon, depending on your time zone. Okay, thanks, CP team, and thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.